Welcome, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the third training in our four-part series on strengthening the workforce through integration of peer recovery services, supervision, and fidelity, supporting peer roles with integrity and impact. There's only one remaining training session in this series, and it will be held next Tuesday, August 26th, same time, 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. If you need the link to register for that last training in the series, I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat right now. This training series is funded in whole or in part through a contract with the Illinois Department of Human Services, Division of Behavioral Health and Recovery. This and all trainings in this series were developed by Peer Power in collaboration with peer recovery support leaders throughout Illinois. Peer Power is a national peer-run company based in Illinois that develops peer leaders who positively impact the systems in which they live, work, and learn. Peer Power was birthed out of a need that Trenda Hedges recognized for specialized peer recovery support professional development. Peer Power contracts with community organizations, providers, state and federal departments, schools, and other entities to develop peer training and provide technical assistance to enhance the fidelity of peer services and further integration of the peer recovery support workforce. You can find more information on Peer Power by visiting our website at peerpower.net. My name is Toni Lynn Packus. I am the founder of Be Heard, Be Healed Studios, a board-certified mental health coach and certified RAP advanced level facilitator. At Be Heard, Be Healed, we specialize in creating virtual spaces that feel just as welcoming and engaging as being together in person. My background combines virtual production with trauma-informed and peer-informed care, and much of my work centers around recovery, resilience, and making space for people to share their stories in a way that fosters growth and healing. Getting to partner with Peer Power is one of the greatest ways to live out our mission. At the heart of everything we do is the belief that when people feel heard, healing becomes possible. So thank you for the work you all do, and thank you for letting me help create a meaningful and connected space for today's experience. Now let me introduce you to our facilitators for today's training. Trenda Hedges is the founder of Peer Power and leader in support integration, partnering with IDHS, DBHR on multiple projects over the past 15 years. She's contributed to national and state initiatives, including the Michigan and North Carolina Warm Lines, the SAMHSA National Guidelines for Crisis Care. An author of numerous peer support trainings, she is known for creating spaces where people bring their authentic selves and mutually learn from one another. She holds CRSS, CPRS, and advanced level RAP facilitator credentials, along with degrees in criminal justice and counseling. Mike Tyson is a certified peer recovery specialist and a dedicated advocate for recovery, serving as the executive director of the National Peer Recovery Alliance. With a rich blend of lived experience and academic achievement, having graduated magna cum laude with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Addictions and an MSW focused on leadership and social change, he actively collaborates with local organizations to enhance support services for individuals dealing with substance use and mental health challenges. As a founding member of several key recovery organizations in Southern Illinois, Mike's impactful work aims to strengthen community resources and empower peer support specialists nationwide. He lives in rural Southern Illinois with his wife and their 2 adult children and their energetic golden doodle champ. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Trenda, and she'll kick it off for us.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thank you, Toni. Every time I hear that name, Champ, it just makes me smile. Love hearing about that golden doodle. So Toni, we're so grateful for your partnership and our partnership with Be Heard, Be Healed Studios. Just plugging that again, if anybody's looking for a virtual events producer, Toni is your gal. So we are starting each training in this series with an overview of our position on peer recovery support in order to anchor us and support role alignment. Too often, peer roles are unintentionally diluted or misaligned due to either a lack of clarity or pressure to conform to the system like billing, documentation, etc. So to prevent this, we must root our efforts in a definition of peer recovery support that honors its distinct identity, evidence-based foundation, and transformational power. So at Peer Power, we believe that peer recovery support is grounded in a unique model built on the integration of three core components: lived experience, lived expertise, and training plus reflective practice. It's these three components together that form the peer recovery support model. No single component on its own fully constitutes the peer support model. Rather, it is their combination that ensures fidelity to the role, upholds its transformative impact, and preserves the non-clinical person-centered nature. It is a distinct model that draws its power from the credibility, trust, and relational equity that only those with lived experience and lived expertise can offer when supported by robust training and a commitment to reflective growth. Please check out our position paper to learn more about each of the three components. Tony is dropping that file in the chat for you. So as we move throughout this session, I want you to keep this definition in mind, because the concepts we discuss in this training series, they're really only meaningful if they protect and elevate the authentic peer role, not replace it, dilute it, or make it unrecognizable. So before we cover the objectives in this training, let's look at the results from the self-assessments that were offered to you on this topic of supervision and fidelity. This one assessed supervision practices to determine how well they aligned with fidelity of peer recovery support. And there were four levels that the assessment scores could fall in: foundational, developing, emerging, and high fidelity. High fidelity. So about half of the respondents that completed this assessment felt their supervision practices highly supported fidelity of the peer model. So yes, that's awesome. Another 30% indicated that their practices were emerging or mostly aligned. So kudos to you too. And then 10% were developing capacity. I hope those are the folks that are here today, right? That's what we're here to do, is learn and develop capacity. And then 7% were at this foundational stage to support fidelity. So really exciting results from that assessment this go around. Let's get started. Our goal by the end of this training is that you will be able to describe the unique role of supervisors in peer support integration, identify training that supports peer-aligned practices, and recognize how supervision contributes to the fidelity of peer practices. So as we kick off the training, we have some questions for the supervisors that are in here. And I want you to just drop your answers in the chat. The first question: did you volunteer to be a supervisor? Yes or no? Did you volunteer? Yes, yes, good, okay. Yes, no, oh, okay, we're seeing some no's in here. Some more yeses, another no. It's part of the role. Okay, not exactly. Loving it. Good transparency. I love this. All right, next question. Did you receive any specialized training for the role of supervisor? No. Oh my goodness. Look at all these no's. There's a yes. All right. That's why we have you here, Chris, because you were a yes on that. Good. Oh, yeah, Jana, right. Yes and yes. Love that. Oh, I'm sorry, Morgan. Morgan says definitely not. Definitely not. Nice. Okay, so last question. Were any of your other responsibilities removed when you became a supervisor? Yeah, that's pretty common. I see a lot of no's, one or two yeses. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So more was added, not removed when we become a supervisor. We don't let go of our other responsibilities necessarily, but we have the added responsibilities that come along with being a supervisor. All right, thank you for just kind of touching base on those questions. So before we even start talking about supervision and fidelity, I just want to call out the pink elephant in the room, right? Because there is a pink elephant in the room. Part of what we are going to discuss in this training relates to supervisors' responsibilities regarding career advancement and leadership training. And we can anticipate the yeah, but responses from many of you. So currently in Illinois, administrative rules tied to Medicaid billing require that peer recovery support specialists be supervised by a QMHP or qualified mental health professional for services to be billed to Medicaid. By definition, a QMHP must be an individual who possesses a master's or doctoral degree in counseling and guidance, rehabilitation counseling, social work, psychology, pastoral counseling, family therapy, or a related field. This presents a serious dilemma because national standards on supervision recommend that supervisors have direct experience as a peer worker, relevant lived experience, and a deep understanding of the skills, values, and principles of the peer role. So, on one hand, we want peer services to be sustainable and billable, and we want opportunities for career advancement, including supervision roles. But, yeah, yes, there actually is a but. On the other hand, the supervision requirements can pull peer recovery support staff back into a clinical structure that doesn't reflect their purpose or values. So it puts peer programs in a bind. Do we meet the billing requirement and risk compromising the integrity of peer support? Or do we uphold national best practices and risk losing funding? Yeah, this is why policy advocacy matters. We need systems that recognize the distinctiveness of peer roles, not just in theory, but actually in structure. And we don't really have that yet. So that includes creating a path for credentialed peer supervisors to be recognized as legitimate supervisors for the purpose of Medicaid billing. So Tony's going to drop a couple of links in the chat that you can reference when you advocate for changes to the Medicaid billing requirements surrounding supervision. Yes, I said you. So, hey, Mike, will you talk to us about supervising peer recovery support workers?
Absolutely. So, this session is about supporting peer recovery support workers with integrity, not just in title, but in practice. When it comes to peer recovery support specialists, supervision is more than oversight. It's a vital structure that sustains the integrity, impact, and well being of the role. In organizations where peer roles are still evolving, supervision becomes one of the most powerful tools for protecting fidelity and building trust. Effective supervision is not about managing performance in a traditional sense. It's about holding space for growth, alignment, and values-based support. It's about ensuring that peer workers are not only equipped to do the work, but are empowered to do it in ways that remain true to the principles of peer support. As we see in this graphic, supervision is a structure for supporting the distinct roles for peer recovery support staff. It's also a space for collaborative reflection and growth. It's a process to ensure role alignment and professional development, as well as a place to reinforce core values and competencies of peer work. Supervision is one of the most influential ways we shape the experiences, identity, and impact of peer recovery support workers. When done well, it reinforces role integrity, builds trust, and ensures that peer support remains grounded in its core values, not just in theory, but in everyday practice. As we move forward, keep in mind supervision is not just something we do, it's a relationship we build. And when that relationship is intentional, collaborative, and rooted in the values of peer support, it becomes a powerful force for both personal and systemic transformation.
All right, so let's start today by taking a quick pulse check on where we're all at. Supervision can mean different things in different organizations, especially when it comes to peer recovery support specialists. So Tony's going to open up a word cloud, and we are asking you to choose just one word that captures your current supervisory relationship with peer staff.
You should be able to see
Nice.
what it
Yeah,
says.
good. I'm starting to see it now. Yeah, seeing great words. Amazing, growth, team, new. Yeah. So you might think of words like collaborative, right? Collaborative or supportive or evolving, or maybe even words like unclear, unclear or challenging. Challenging, right? There's just no right or wrong answer. It's just about where you're at right now, not where you want the relationships to be, but where you're at right now. Yeah, this is good. I love a safe space, intentional, wonderful, right? That's a great word, wonderful. Yeah, so our current supervisory relationship with peer recovery staff, mostly positive here. Mostly positive. Notice the range of words, of expressions. We often find that supervision of peer staff can be really meaningful, right? It can be both deeply meaningful and it can be complex. Like, where do you draw the line as a supervisor so that you don't veer off into a therapist role, right? Instead of a supervisor role, especially if you are a therapist. So, what themes do you notice? Oh, that's one. Oh, that's an interesting word there. Micromanaging. Yeah, undefined, unclear. Yeah, so kind of starting to be a little more transparent after we got past all the positiveness, right? Like, this is real stuff, there are very deep complexities involved in supervising peer recovery staff. And how do we stay in our role and stay in relationship as a supervisor with our supervisees in a way that empowers and honors the peer recovery support role? Yeah, so thank you for your transparency. I'm going to ask one other question. Is there a word you wish were in the cloud that's not there yet? Defined. Yeah, thanks, Amanda. Absolutely, right? Like, that's a word we wish was there, defined. It happens, we're on this virtual training platform. Happens all the time. So if our word is defined, I wonder what it would take to get there. Or if our word is mutual, what would it take to get there? Maybe the word is, like Ricardo says, strengths focus. Like, what would it take for us to get there? So Tony, would you capture that word cloud for us so we can insert it in the slides before we send it out? And then we'll jump back into our PowerPoint presentation. Thank you all for just the interaction and honest, open transparency, because this is not easy.
Yeah, so looking at some of the words that were shared, we see a wide range of experiences, which is pretty typical for peer support. That tells us something important. Supervision of peer recovery support specialists isn't a one-size-fits-all practice. It's personal, it's dynamic, and more than anything, it's relational. That activity also reminds us that supervision is not just a checklist or a series of administrative duties. It's a relationship that profoundly shapes how peer staff experience their role, their sense of purpose, and whether they feel truly seen, valued, and safe in the workplace. Supervision sends a message. Every conversation, every check in, or lack of one, communicates something about how we value a person's time, voice, and presence. When supervision is consistent, respectful, and aligned with peer values, it tells the peer worker, you belong here. Your voice matters. Your growth is supported. When supervision is inconsistent, unclear, or dismissive of peer values, it tells a different story. Your role is secondary. Your questions are a burden. Your lived experience doesn't carry weight here. As supervisors, we choose which message we are sending.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Mike. Effective supervision is rooted in trust. In trust. Trust is not a nice to have. It is truly the foundation of effective, values aligned supervision, especially when working with peer recovery support specialists. In systems where peer roles are still emerging or misunderstood, and these may be the very systems that once harmed and oppressed that peer support worker, trust is essential within the supervisory relationship for creating safety, transparency, and mutual respect. You will hear us say this repeatedly because peer recovery support is different than clinical services. Peer support is relational by nature. It's not like a therapeutic intervention. It is relational by nature. If the supervision relationship lacks trust, peer workers might feel unsafe, scrutinized, or even silenced. And many peer recovery support staff come from marginalized backgrounds and may carry past experiences of being stigmatized, pathologized, or even excluded in clinical systems. So supervisors must actively earn trust, not assume it. Supervision without trust becomes transactional, focused on compliance rather than growth. And with trust, supervision becomes transformational. So reflect honestly on the questions that I'm going to ask, and Tony's going to drop them in the chat as well. I just want you to reflect on these. Do you think the peer recovery support specialists that you supervise feel comfortable to ask for clarification about policies and procedures? Do you think they feel safe to say, I'm not sure I understand that policy, without fear of judgment? I'm loving seeing all these yeses pop up in chat. Yeah, I believe so. I hope so. Yeah, good, good, good. All right, next question. Do you think that they feel safe enough to request additional training? Do you think they can say, I don't feel confident in this area. Can I get additional training? Or are they just supposed to figure it out? Yes, good. I'm loving this. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, and they have done so. Lisa says, I hope so. Yeah, absolutely. All right, next question. Do you think they trust you enough to share challenges? Do you think they can talk openly about a different or like a difficult interaction, an emotional toll, or ethical dilemma without fear it will be used against them? I love this. There's a definitely and a yes, definitely in here. Yes, and they have. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think this is really reflective of the assessment results, right? Where we see this high fidelity model. All right, next question. Do you think they see you as open to discussing accommodation needs? Are they supported in requesting flexibility or workplace accommodations for mental health, trauma triggers, or disabilities? Nice. Yes. Good. Yes. Love that, Jana. That's amazing. Oh, so good. Yeah, thank you for saying that, Amanda. I think so. However, they're still reluctant, right? Like, I think so. It's there, but there's still some reluctancy. Good, good, good stuff. All right, last question. Do you think they feel heard when they engage in open dialogue about work performance and decision making? Is feedback a two-way conversation? Are they invited to share how supervision feels to them or what's working or not working in their role? Again, yeses right out the gate. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, this is so good. Good stuff. I don't even know why we're doing this training. Looks like you guys are already phenomenal, right? All right, listen, we cannot build high fidelity peer programs without building high trust supervision practices. It starts with asking, do people feel seen, safe, and supported, or just managed? Right? There was a word that popped up in that word cloud, micromanaged. So there's still a little bit of work to be done. If a peer support specialist is afraid to speak up, or to say, I need help, or to challenge a policy that doesn't align with peer values, that's not just a trust issue, folks. It's actually a fidelity issue. So, Mike, are you going to talk to us about supervision and fidelity?
You bet I am. One of the most important responsibilities of supervising peer recovery support specialists is ensuring fidelity. That is, staying true to the values, principles, and practices that make peer support distinct. Supervision is a critical structure for keeping peer work rooted in its foundation of non clinical support. Without intentional reinforcement, these values can easily be overshadowed by traditional clinical approaches or institutional norms. In supervision, we create space to reflect on how peer support is being practiced and how to uphold these values in real world, often complex situations. Without a strong supervisory framework, peer roles often experience role drift, while responsibilities begin to resemble clinical, compliance, or case management like duties. This might look like being asked to take clinical notes, monitoring medication compliance, or delivering therapeutic interventions. Not only does this create ethical and professional boundary issues, but it can also undermine the trust and authenticity that make peer support effective. Supervision should provide the clarity and confidence to push back when peer roles are at risk of being co opted. As we mentioned in the opening statement, peer support has its own nationally recognized competencies, many of which focus on things like shared experiences, cultural humility, and relationship based work. Effective supervision includes reviewing and reinforcing these competencies, not just to improve performance, but to protect the integrity and unique contribution of the role. Effective supervision also recognizes and understands that peer support boundaries are rooted in mutual, shared lived experiences and relational connection. Unlike clinical or medical boundaries, which emphasize hierarchy, professional distance, and expertise, in peer support, boundaries are designed to foster trust and connection without creating dependency or power imbalances, allowing for authentic human to human relationships while still protecting both parties. Supervision helps peer workers strengthen their boundaries so they can show up fully as peers without overextending or stepping into roles that compromise their own well-being.
Yeah,
Brenda, would
nice,
you like to
Mike.
tell us a little bit about supervision?
Mhm. Absolutely. Right. Thanks. Supervision, when done thoughtfully and with intention, can be a powerful lever for equity, especially in behavioral health settings where peer roles often exist at the margin of traditional hierarchies. On this slide are 3 ways that supervision promotes equity for peer recovery support specialists. Without intentional supervision, peer workers may be viewed as less professional or less capable due to stigma surrounding their history with mental health, substance use, or legal system involvement. Effective supervision works to dismantle those power imbalances by creating equitable expectations ensuring peer staff are included in decision-making and challenging marginalizing behaviors within teams. Are peer voices being heard in team meetings? Are they invited to trainings or are they left out? Equity isn't just about fairness in tasks, it's also about psychological safety. Peer staff need supervision spaces where they can bring forward concerns about tokenism, role misunderstanding, or exclusion from decision making without fear of judgment or retaliation. Supervision should be a place where peer workers can reflect on challenges, co-create solutions, and have their professional growth supported, not judged against clinical benchmarks. Supervisors will need to be prepared to support peer workers who come from historically marginalized communities. Use supervision to process experiences of discrimination, cultural isolation, or even systemic harm. Supervision encourages development of identity-affirming peer practices like affinity spaces, where shared experiences are not just understood, but centered, or culturally specific peer models that are intentionally designed to reflect and center the cultural identities, values, practices, and lived experiences of specific communities, such as our Black, Indigenous, Latinx, LGBTQIA+, or even immigrant groups. These models go beyond simply adapting mainstream peer support. They are grounded in the community's own ways of healing, relating, and surviving systemic oppression. And lastly, supervisors advocate for equal access to growth opportunities, training, and leadership pathways. As I mentioned previously, when I called out that pink elephant in the room, traditional development paths are designed around clinical roles or roles that require higher education degrees. These types of professional development policies can leave peer workers overlooked or under-supported in their growth. Equitable supervision means helping peer recovery support staff grow within the scope and strengths of the peer role, not expecting them to conform to clinical expectations in order to advance. It looks like creating pathways that honor the unique role of peer support within our system of care. It looks like offering opportunities to build facilitation skills, participate in peer-led trainings, engage in policy work, or mentor others. And importantly, it means recognizing that professional growth for peer recovery support staff should not come at the cost of their identity or values as peer supporters. When we supervise with equity in mind, we're not just helping individuals grow, we're transforming what leadership and expertise look like in behavioral health. Mike, what else can supervision do?
Well, finally, think of supervision as a sustainability strategy. Building on that last point on the previous slide, because developing career pathways is not just about equity, but also about sustainability. Supervisors are key in developing leadership capacity and advocating for career pathways for peer recovery support specialists. When supervision includes mentorship, skill building, and shared power, it helps peer workers grow, not just in their current roles, but into future leadership positions. That kind of investment strengthens both retention and representation. Peer work, like most other roles in behavioral health, is emotionally demanding. It requires intentional support and spaces for debriefing. We build sustainability by investing in supervision that reflects peer values. When we do this, we don't just protect the role, we protect the people in it. We know that peer support specialists often hold space for people in deep distress while drawing from their own lived experience. Without intentional support, this emotional labor can lead to compassion fatigue, burnout, or vicarious trauma. Supervision offers a regular space for reflection, boundaries, and ethics discussions, and checking in on wellness, not just productivity. And finally, effective supervision helps to cultivate an organizational culture that truly respects peer roles and centers recovery oriented values. It models how to hold space, how to give feedback, and how to honor the value of lived expertise. Over time, this shapes how the entire organization views peer support, not as an add on, but as an essential, valued part of the team. So when we talk about sustainability, we're not just talking about keeping people employed. We're talking about keeping people empowered, supported, and positioned for long-term impact.
Well, we are delighted to have Chris Dennis here with us today. Chris is a writer, educator, and recovery services program manager at Egyptian Health Department, where he manages a recovery-oriented system of care and a team of 7 recovery support specialists. His personal essays on recovery have been featured in the Paris Review, Granta, LitHub, Astra, and the Best American Essays 2023, earning him a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, the Krauss Essay Prize, and a New York Times Sydney Award for long form journalism. A graduate of Washington University in St. Louis's writing program, Chris lives in Southern Illinois. So Chris, talk to us about some of the intentional ways you utilize supervision.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, I guess it is by now. So thank you guys for asking me to do this. I really appreciate it. It was interesting when I was trying to think about the story I would tell about our recovery services program, all the things I had to think through about how it happened and how all this came to be. So I just was going to sort of share the story of the evolution of recovery support at our agency, and then how I sort of came into that role. Um, we're a large clinical behavioral health provider, so we have mental health services and level 1 outpatient substance use treatment services. And we had our very first peer here probably over a decade ago now. It was one person, um, and no one knew what to do with that person. It was the wild frontier of peer recovery support services. So you can imagine there was just general uncertainty, even though they were so excited about the idea of having someone with lived experience serving people who were in our treatment program. Um, but in the beginning, it was sort of like they'd show up and they'd fill in a position whenever a counselor was out, to sort of hang out with the client when there wasn't a clinician available. They sometimes acted as an assistant to our clinicians. They did provide transportation, which is still obviously a huge part of our services. I'm sure it's that way for everybody. But they definitely felt secondary. And so they weren't quite sure what their responsibilities should be. And so it took years. It took a few years. It took more time for peers to show up and for them all to start working together for those roles to be better defined. So um, 2 years ago, though, um, we started receiving the Recovery Services Grant. And at that time, because it was grant-based, decided to move our peers out of the substance use treatment department. So this was a brand new idea. We wanted them to move them out of the clinical side, and we put them in our agency. We have a health education department as well. And so we moved all of them into that. It was very interesting, but it was the first time that our peers were supervised by someone who was not clinical and who was a person with lived experience. So it was kind of brand new. And because this happened and I came into that role, I was that person who had lived experience and was not clinical. Um, it became very collaborative, and all of the recovery specialists, our peers, helped to work together to create the new recovery services program. So they felt like they had a stake in it. They felt like they were building something together, and they all sort of became leaders in that role at the same time. So it was very empowering for them. It was kind of incredible to see. Um, So some of them took on different roles. We then had someone who was working in the court. We had someone who was responding to crisis calls. We had someone who was helping everyone else with all of their billing notes because they were really good at that. Everyone kind of got to define their own role, which was also incredibly empowering, and made them feel like they owned our program. But as you are all aware, I'm sure, if you were a clinical health provider, last October, it was then required that um, all of peer services be billed to Medicaid at that point. So it was complicated. We were a little heartbroken about that because we had established ourselves as this other entity that was no longer clinical. Um, we knew it was required. We didn't have a choice. But at our agency, what we've done is I still supervise the recovery services program. And then we have a clinician who supervises the billing aspect of it. So I'm there for day-to-day things. We all have a relationship together. The clinical person just steps in and comes to our staffing as it pertains to billing things. So we're kind of sharing the role a little bit. To be honest, we rarely hear from the clinical person unless there's an issue. It's really worked for us. I think they feel super empowered by that. Um, but it has been complicated. It took us a minute to like figure out how we were going to do that so we didn't have to go back to the way things were under the clinical side because we liked the sort of liberty that happened whenever we separated ourselves from it. Um, I also I've tried to, and I'm new to being a supervisor. It's my first time doing that. So I think that has made a big impact on like the circle of feedback that happens in our program. People are very comfortable coming to me to talk about the problems. We're all people in recovery. Part of our staffing is about our own recovery sometimes, whenever that's necessary. And I defer to their expertise all the time. So it's been really humbling in that way because even though I want to be their leader and act as their leader, I feel like I'm always in a position of service to them because they are really experts at what they do. And some of them have been doing it a really long time. Um, so the peers at our agency also help to create all of our service tools. Um, they've created a lot of the policies that we have here because it was their idea that the policy needed to exist in the first place. They work on those together, and it's been kind of incredible. They've proposed changes to screening tools. They've proposed changes to our transportation policy. They've propose lots of different other policy things. And then I take those things to, the person in charge of that at our agency, and we talk through it. And almost every single time, it's been adopted as an agency-wide policy because of something that one of our peers thought of. So I think in that way, they always feel heard and they feel in control of the work that we do, and as if they're all helping to shape it. A lot of that I actually would attribute to probably our CEO and lots of people in leadership here because they're so open to hearing from us. They care about what we do. They talk about how invaluable all of us are all the time, which is it just reinforces that feeling of that there are people who are experts, and it reinforces how important peer services are, and that it's equal to a lot of the other things that are happening at our agency that has 250 people working here in lots of different departments. I think another thing that's really helped to make our program successful is that um, I think everyone in our program has been Employee of the Month. Um, we've had two people in our program that were Employees of the Year at our agency. And we have 250 people that work here. So we're a program of 8. And so to have 2 of us out of that program be Employees of the Year, I think really demonstrates how much they care about the work that we do and that they see what we're doing. I mean, they see our people in the halls, meeting people in the lobby, taking them places. We're also pretty active on social media when it comes to like outreach and other things we're doing. So that's been a struggle for me. I'm not always good at that part. Um, but we try to be visible so that we can let our community know that people who use drugs recover, people who use drugs become leaders, and they can really make a huge difference in their agency, even an agency like ours, which is a public health department. Um, and that comes with all the sort of public perceptions that a health department does in any community. But there are people here who are in recovery who are providing crucial services to help other people in our community find recovery too. I'm still learning how to be visible in that way, but I think we're doing a pretty good job so far. And I do think that's crucial. It's really important for people to think about. Um, Sometimes I worry that our staff is overtrained. We go to so many trainings. Our agency sends us to the Recovery Leadership Summit every single year. We've gone to that for the past, I think, 4 years in a row. Um, Mike Tyson has really helped us a lot in this way by founding the Southern Illinois Recovery Network. So many of our staff participate in that collaborative region-wide group, and they show up to all of those events, sometimes help plan those events. So I think in that way, it's been incredible to see them all become leaders in our region and in Southern Illinois in general. Um, so we've had to develop this culture, I think, of ongoing education, but the peers have really made that happen. They're good at asking for things when they want to know more. And every time they see some new training, they ask if they can go. And if the funding's there, we almost always send them. So actually, I think at this point, um, 80% of our staff are working towards a bachelor's degree. Um, so they're all continuing their education. I don't know how they're doing it while also working here, but they're incredible people. But they want to do that. Now, not all of them. It's not like it's a requirement at all and never will be a requirement for them to have a bachelor's degree or any kind of higher education to fill this position, but they really want to. They're so excited about it. And they actually see um, their role as a peer as a path to other things. Even if they're still working as a peer, they know that there are other positions that are available to them that expand what a peer is possible of doing because they've seen other people at our agency go into those roles. Um, just one small thing. I'm not going over my time, am I, you guys? We're good? Awesome. Okay. Um, So I just wanted to give this little story about how our organization has solved problems with peer feedback. It's kind of been ongoing, but in order to have this recovery services program, that it's its own program, its own entity that we've developed together that is separate from the other things at our agency, um, that is determined by us. We've had to kind of push the boundaries a little bit of what the agency imagined in the beginning, especially in terms of like harm reduction. I feel like a lot of that it didn't happen in the same way when the peers were in the substance use treatment side of things. Whenever it was totally clinical, um, because the state determines what level one outpatient treatment looks like, there are guidelines. There's a lot of sort of push for abstinence whenever it comes to clinical treatment, which I totally understand why that's in place. But when we were in that program, it made us so hard to have good, long-standing relationships with people who were still using drugs. And now that we're our own program, we do that all the time. We've had to fight for this a little bit. But we have peers who've been seeing people for 9 months, a year, who are still actively using. We never come to them with the expectation that they're going to stop using drugs. We want to provide whatever needs they have within, reason and in limits, and build a good relationship with them. And I can't tell you how many times that building a relationship with someone who is still in active use has led to their recovery. It happens all the time. It was a hard ask at our agency, and I know it's the same other places, to say this person is high, this person is under the influence. We know that. We still want them to come into the office. We want them to be here. We want to take them places. We want to take them to the doctor. We want them to come to group meetings, within reason. Sometimes we've had people that are so intoxicated that they can't meaningfully participate, of course. But it's been great to continue those relationships with people in that position. And I think it's changed those people's lives without a doubt. And just one other little story. Whenever the program was about to make that transition out of the clinical department and into its own thing, there was a post on social media from one of our peers that someone else had taken this picture and shared it on social media. But beside the peer in the photo was a red Solo cup. And lots of people at our agency saw the picture. Everyone was calling every supervisor they had because they thought there was alcohol in this cup. Um, we had to have a big meeting about this because people were concerned that there was a perception of peers at the agency who were still using drugs or drinking alcohol. It just became so complicated because I think the agency itself was pushing back against what they knew was cultural discrimination in our community. And they had internalized some of that discrimination because the beginning of the conversation was about how should we monitor all of our peers' social media? Should there be rules for how they post on social media? Are all of our peers abstinent? What does it mean if they're not? And I think a lot of that was their own concern about what does a peer do, what's required of a peer in terms of their own recovery, but also what are people going to think? And as a state agency ourselves, sort of all of those kind of perceptions that the state has created around people who are in recovery or people who use drugs is embedded in our system too and informs the way they think about us. But I do have to say, when we were in those meetings talking about this, and we talked about what recovery really looks like and what recovery is, everyone in the room changed their mind about that picture and what was required of the people that work at our agency. I think they loved hearing that the person in recovery defines their own recovery. I don't know that they thought about that before. I mean, I get so used to saying these things that we feel like everyone thinks of recovery that way, but it isn't true. Um, and I do think we got to change our agency's perception of what that means. And so I think that's just another example of how the peers changed policy at our agency because of that. And they were scared to talk about it because they were like, am I going to lose my job? Will I be penalized for this? And for what I do outside of work, even if I'm a person in recovery from methamphetamine who still has a margarita at dinner, I never imagined what a difficult conversation that was going to be to talk about those little nuances. But I think because our agency listened and it felt good for them to, take in our feedback and change policy based on it, that it made the peers here feel like they were shaping the program and how it worked. So I'll stop there, but thank you guys.
Oh my goodness, Chris, that was fantastic. I am just like blown away right now. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I mean, I think it just really gives us the practical, real life example of how peer recovery support programs can be developed and evolved in super effective ways. So because of that pink elephant I talked about earlier that exists in many behavioral health organizations, supervisors of peer support workers are one of those qualified mental health professional roles. The people that have been trained in traditional models of clinical supervision, These models are designed to oversee therapeutic work. And I think we heard a little bit of that in Chris's story, right? That's why they separated themselves from that clinical team. And that training, right? That training, it really has its place, and we absolutely value that clinical framework. But peer support is fundamentally different. It's non-clinical. It's built on values like mutuality, self-determination, shared lived experience, and non-clinical support. And when supervisors apply clinical frameworks to peer supervision without adapting their approach, it often leads to role confusion, fidelity drift, reduced impact on outcomes of peer support. And decades of research show that quality peer support actually increases engagement, especially with people who wouldn't otherwise participate in services. It improves quality of life. It reduces hospitalization, reduces substance use, reduces relapses, and decreases cost of services. Supervision that is grounded in clinical correction rather than peer support values can unintentionally strip away what makes peer roles effective and transformative. I think that's the beauty of Chris's story, because Chris is able to maintain the supervisory role over day-to-day operations while there is another QMHP that comes in, or a clinician that comes in to help supervise the billing piece. That's where we can find this match, this beautiful match that can actually happen in spite of the systemic barriers that we see in our state. So supervision that is grounded in clinical correction tends to operate from a deficit-based model because it focuses on identifying what's wrong with the worker's behavior or performance rather than building on their strengths, values, or lived experience. So Mike, will you share more about supervision?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I may, just to go back on a little bit of something that Chris said, I think it speaks to the value of what happens when we see a culture shift to embrace peer support and peer workforce in alignment with our values. In that, Chris talked about how both the peer workforce felt good about this process, but also the clinicians and the agency had an opportunity to feel good about this process. They were able to take into an account a specialized workforce in their organization, to hear their voice, and then institute policy changes in response to that. And to me, I feel like that's a rare commodity in a lot of big organizations. I mean, you talk about 250 people shifting culture like that is extremely difficult, and speaks to why peers are in this role and why we are so valuable. Back to the topic at hand. Supervision is far more than oversight. It's a dynamic, values driven practice that shapes the success, sustainability, and fidelity of peer support services. Dr. Jonathan Edwards outlines 5 critical functions of supervision that offer a comprehensive and culturally responsive framework for supporting peer recovery support specialists. These 5 functions: administrative, supportive, educative, advocative, and evaluative, are interconnected and rooted in commitment to equity, role clarity, and growth. The administrative function of supervision begins prior to onboarding. It includes preparing and vetting of job descriptions, promotion of internal knowledge of peer support, and determination of fit between the candidate and the position. The supportive function of supervision overlaps into some of the other functions of supervision and includes support navigating barriers and challenges, problem solving, and promoting self care, boundary setting, and effective time management. Supportive supervision is a compassionate mirror and supports action planning, confidence, and efficacy to promote supervisees and self empowerment. Educative supervision focuses on a professional development and training with regard to the job scope. This function of supervision identifies learning opportunities, links to peer training, and mutual learning like peer group supervision. The educative function incorporates knowledge gained from learning opportunities into peer support practice. Supervisors of peer support workers ideally need to have an understanding of the core values of peer support and how to put those into practice. We acknowledge that this may be a gap for many supervisors who are not steeped in the practice of peer support, but rather have clinical or medical experience. And we encourage participation in the Department of Behavioral Health and Recovery supervisory trainings and learning collaboratives. Advocative describes the practice of advocacy. Supervisors must learn to advocate for peer support at the micro, meso, and macro levels. The supervisory function demonstrates sensitivity. The supervision function demonstrates sensitivity of historically marginalized staff and responds to nuances without creating a double standard. It focuses on inclusion and visibility of peer staff and services while promoting equity across roles, challenging peer dynamics like discrimination and marginalization, and facilitates changes at all levels, which dovetails into one of the peer support core competencies and includes change at the person served level, interdepartmental equity among staff, and policy revisions that support inclusion of peer support workers. Evaluative supervision focuses on establishing and communicating clear expectations for the work. This function creates strategies and tools for achieving desired outcomes, develops methods for assessing performance and evaluating results. It also shares approaches for addressing performance issues. Evaluative supervision is also an opportunity to develop mutuality, where both the supervisor and the supervisee provide and receive feedback. To learn more about Dr. Edwards' 5 critical functions of supervision, Tony is going to drop a link to a video where he discusses each function in more detail. I encourage you all to check that out.
Nice, Mike. Thanks. When we supervise peers through a clinical lens, we risk managing them out of the very values that make peer support powerful. When we supervise through a peer lens, we protect fidelity, promote growth, and advance equity. So supervision through a peer lens means centering support and reflection, not just oversight. Valuing lived expertise as central to the role and honored as a valid form of expertise. Recognizing the emotional labor of peer work and building space for debriefing. Protecting fidelity by ensuring that tasks, language, and expectations are aligned with the peer role not imposed from clinical culture, and creating a supervisory relationship that's built in trust, partnership, and mutual learning. Supervision rooted in peer values shifts from what's wrong with you to what support do you need. It focuses on co-learning and reflection, role alignment, rather than clinical conformity, and empowering peer workers to problem solve and lead from their lived expertise. At Peer Power, we've created a one-page supervision models comparison chart for a side-by-side comparison of the 2 supervision models that we just discussed. Tony's going to drop that file in the chat for you to download. This tool could be a conversation opener between supervisors and supervisees, and an instrument that can be used for shifting culture within the organization. So, Mike, let's take a closer look at each of the components that support supervision through a peer lens.
Absolutely. Thanks, Trenda. First, supervisors can demonstrate that they value lived expertise in peer support roles through intentional practices that reinforce respect, inclusion, and alignment with peer values. Here are some meaningful ways. Name it and normalize it. By openly affirming that lived expertise is a core qualification, not just a background trait. elevate lived experience in decision making. By inviting peer staff into program development, training design, and policy conversations, and invite peer voices when adapting workflows or service models. Don't assume traditional systems fit peer support. Advocate for structural inclusion. By ensuring job descriptions, evaluations, and advancement pathways reflect peer-specific competencies, push for equitable pay scales that recognize the value of peer expertise. Recognize contributions in meaningful ways. By giving credit when peer staff share insights that impact outcomes, such as engagement strategies or recovery-centered approaches. Celebrate successes publicly, within the team, in reports, or during all staff meetings. And this last point, integrate peer values into supervision, is a point worth emphasizing again and again. Beyond supervision structures and into practical application, this might sound like, how is your lived expertise informing the way you show up in your work? Or perhaps, what strengths from your journey, your recovery journey, are you drawing on this week? The second strategy for redefining supervision through a peer lens relates to building space for debriefing. Effective debriefing and supervision for peer support workers is a trauma-informed, value-centered process that creates space for reflection, learning, and emotional integration. Unlike clinical correction models, debriefing and peer support supervision honors mutuality, lived experience, and the relational impact of the work. It is grounded in trust and psychological safety. Peers need a space to acknowledge the emotional labor of this work without feeling like they are being clinically assessed. Debriefing should be centered in reflection, not evaluation. By inviting curiosity and self awareness, anchor debriefing in peer support values and practices. This might sound like, what was hard about that situation? Or how did it align or misalign with peer support values? Perhaps, is there anything you would do differently next time? And finally, practice debriefing by applying trauma-informed principles like collaboration and mutuality, empowerment and choice, and culture, historical, and gender responsiveness. Aligning task is the third strategy for redefining supervision through a peer lens. For supervisors, protecting fidelity of the peer support role means ensuring tasks, language, and expectations consistently reflect the values, scope, and purpose of peer work. As you consider the tasks that get assigned to peer recovery support workers, regularly review them to ensure they are aligned with peer support practices. On this side, we have listed both peer-aligned tasks and misaligned tasks. What stands out to you in this comparison chart? Drop your reflections in the chat. So if you need resources to support the development of peer-aligned tasks, you can refer to the National Practice Guidelines for Peer Specialists and Supervisors and the SAMHSA Core Competencies. Tony is going to drop links to those documents in this chat. Tony, you're the best. Thanks. You're already on top of it. All right. Supervision can also be a powerful space for mutual learning and shared growth. And that brings us to the fourth strategy for redefining supervision through a peer lens. When supervision is grounded in the values of peer support, it shifts from a top-down model to one that honors expertise and insights of both supervisor and the peer support worker. This creates space for honest dialogue, collaborative reflection, and continuous learning. Here are a few ways supervision can become a two-way street and strengthens the work, the relationship, and the organization as a whole. Supervisors and peer workers can reflect together on challenging situations, sharing perspectives and insights without hierarchy. This promotes shared problem solving and learning. Effective supervision includes structured opportunities for supervisees to offer feedback to supervisors about support, communication, or organizational needs. This models mutuality. Supervision sessions can include joint discussions about how peer support values are being upheld or challenged in the work, helping both parties deepen their understanding. Supervisors can also explore training materials with the peer worker and talk about what is aligned and identify for improvement. And finally, mutual learning can include examining how organizational culture or systems impact peer roles and brainstorm advocacy or improvement strategies together. As we've seen throughout these slides, redefining supervision through a peer lens requires more than adapting clinical models. It calls for a fundamental shift in how we view leadership, expertise, and support. When we center lived experience, create space for reflection and debriefing, and protect the distinct role of peer support, we uphold the integrity of the work. And when supervision becomes a relationship built on mutual learning, we create environments where peer workers can thrive, not just survive. This is how we move from supervision as an oversight to supervision as empowerment.
Let's shift from redefining supervision to equipping supervisors. I saw in the chat earlier, there were some comments about how tough the role of a supervisor is. Supervisors need support groups too, and we absolutely affirm that. So supervision of peer roles requires more than clinical knowledge. It requires role fluency. So how do we get there? These 4 pillars on this slide, training, tools, coaching, and collaboratives, can provide a framework to equip supervisors to protect fidelity, provide trauma-informed support, and challenge bias or role misperception. Organizations can start with training supervisors in peer values, competencies, and fidelity expectations. When we first started, we asked if you received any specialized training. So many of you said no, right? So many of you said no, some said yes, and that was great to see that mix of responses. Many supervisors come from clinical or administrative backgrounds where they may not have had exposure to the core values of peer support, things like mutuality, self-determination. We need to ensure supervisors receive intentional training in the competencies specific to peer work and understand how to safeguard fidelity, not just to the tasks of the role, but to the spirit and purpose of peer support. That's why I was taking the time to go and find the information on the core competencies for peer workers, because we want to make sure that you have those tools to be able to review, because it is different. Next, organizations can provide tools for navigating power dynamics and supporting mutuality. Supervision in peer roles requires a shift in mindset. Rather than a top-down authority structure, supervision should create a mutual space for growth. But mutuality doesn't just happen automatically. It takes tools and reflective practice. Supervisors need support in navigating power imbalances, especially when supervising someone with lived experience that differs from their own experience, or someone whose role may be undervalued within the larger team. Chris gave us great examples of how well Egyptian Health Department is doing that part. So we want to equip supervisors to support and to foster trust without assuming that authority is the default. We also want to make sure to offer coaching on equity-centered, strengths-based supervision models. Supervision should not be about correcting deficits. It should be about cultivating strengths, building confidence, and removing barriers. Equity-centered supervision recognizes the ways in which peer workers, especially those from historically marginalized communities, may face added layers of bias, tokenism, or exclusion. Coaching supervisors to use equity-informed and trauma-responsive approaches ensures that we are creating a space where peer workers feel seen, heard, and supported. And finally, supervisors don't need to figure this out alone. There are resources and communities of practice designed specifically to help them grow in this role. So we strongly encourage participation in statewide and national learning collaboratives like those hosted by DBHR. They're focused on supervision of peer roles. They're specifically focused on that. These spaces provide access to shared learning, peer-reviewed tools, and mentorship from others doing this work well. So next, we're going to shift the training focus to peer-aligned training practices for peer support workers that are grounded in SAMHSA and the National Association of Peer Support Standards. At the foundational level is the practice of peer-aligned onboarding training. The next level moves into training that's beyond the basics to sustain growth. And the top level of peer-aligned training practices focuses on empowering peer leaders for career advancement. So let's take a look at each of these and how they support Fidelity. Too often, peer staff are onboarded into systems without clarity on their unique role, and this sets the stage for confusion and drift. Supervisors play a crucial part in creating a values-aligned onboarding experience. Lost my place there. This means going beyond HR paperwork to reinforce the why behind peer roles, the how of ethical practice, and what support looks like that preserves the integrity of the role. So to lay the foundation of peer-aligned onboarding, supervisors can integrate peer values, competencies, and role clarity from day one. Provide an orientation on peer-specific ethics, boundaries, and mutuality. Address common myths and role misunderstandings early. And discuss any organizational wellness programs to support well-being and cultural beliefs about supporting wellness, like flexible scheduling, quiet spaces, and weekly debriefing. So you might be thinking as a supervisor, I wish I had that type of onboarding, right? And that is the beauty of the influence of peer culture. It actually creates a more wellness-focused culture for everybody in the organization. So how do we grow beyond laying the foundation, Mike?
Professional development for peer workers must be ongoing and aligned with their lived expertise, not just institutional policies. Reflective practice, like discussing values, alignment and supervision, or learning through real world experiences, helps deepen their role fidelity. Encourage participation in peer led training spaces, learning collaborative, and spaces that support identity and inclusion. Sorry, I got taught in my own words. Some options for sustaining growth include creating structured opportunities for continuing education in peer values and practices, encouraging reflective supervision and peer group learning spaces, incorporating training that includes trauma-informed, recovery-oriented, and equity-based lenses, support access to culturally specific or affinity-based learning opportunities. These are identity affirming peer practices that center shared experiences or culturally specific peer models that are intentionally designed to reflect and center the cultural identities, values, and practices and lived experiences of specific communities such as Black, Indigenous, Latinx, LGBTQIA, or immigrant groups. These models go beyond simply adapting mainstream peer support. They are grounded in their community's own ways of healing relating to surviving systemic oppression. Like many states, peers in Illinois may be certified by different sanctioning bodies. However, the state's most recognizable certifications are the CPRS and CRSS, which are offered by the Illinois Certification Board. To be certified through the ICB, peers must receive a minimum of 100 hours of approved education and 100 hours of supervision. Training must cover 4 domains critical to each role: advocacy, recovery support, mentoring, and ethics. During the certification phase, inexperienced peers can expect to spend as much as 10% of their time training and attending supervision. To maintain certification, peers are required to attend between 30 and 40 hours of training biannually or every 2 years, depending on which certification they hold. There are no supervisory requirements to maintain certification. However, peers should expect to meet with a peer supervisor for 4 to 5 hours per month and spend roughly 3 to 5% of their overall time attending training and supervision. Often we think of training through the lens of continuing education hours, just enough to maintain certification, but professional development should be about growth, not just maintenance. Real training prepares peer workers to evolve in their role, expand their impact, and lead. Leadership is not a departure from peer identity, it's an extension of it. We need to normalize leadership development as part of the peer role, not something that moves people away from peer support, but something that enhances it. Peer leaders bring lived experience to systems change conversations, program development, and workforce advocacy. And we should be encouraging that. Leadership doesn't mean clinicalizing the role. It means deepening one's impact while staying true to core values. Career pathways should be intentional, not incidental. When peers are trained with advancement in mind, they're better equipped to move into supervision, training, coordination, and policy roles. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when organizations build clear, supported pathways. Skills like system and policy advocacy aren't just add ons, they're core capacities for leadership in peer services. Offering training in these areas helps peer workers broaden their impact while remaining grounded in their lived expertise. Finally, it's not just about sending peers to trainings, it's about building peer led ecosystems of support. Mentorship, coaching, co facilitation, and co learning models help emerging leaders grow in ways that are relational, reciprocal, and rooted in the peer model. This is one of our key areas of focus at Peer Power.
Thanks, Mike. So we're going to fast track a few slides and jump ahead just because we see that we're running a little bit low on time. And I think this is a question that we all ask ourselves, which is how do we actually measure supervision and fidelity success? How do we actually measure that? And so, Tony, if you want to just go ahead and flip over to the next slide. I'm gonna share some ways and some tools that we've developed for measuring that success. So it requires looking at both the quality of supervision and the alignment of peer practices with core values and role definitions. Here on this slide is a breakdown of how to measure both supervision and fidelity success in a peer recovery support context. So we regularly design fidelity assessment tools, and we are going to soon have a resource page that's posted on our website with links and downloads. I'm actually working on it right now. If you choose to, or if you chose to complete the self-assessments prior to the trainings in this series, then you've experienced a sampling of the tools that we're in the process of developing. So for now, we're going to give you, or we can give you access to a few of our fidelity tools through the Zoom chat. So the first tool is our peer support fidelity self-assessment tool. This is different than the organizational fidelity tool, and it's designed to be used by peer support specialists to reflect on how closely your beliefs and day-to-day work align with the values, ethics, and grassroots foundations of the peer support model. So that's the first tool. The second one is our Supervision Fidelity self-survey. This tool is designed to be a learning and improvement resource, not just an evaluation, right? It encourages reflection and fidelity alignment in supervision practices. So once the supervisor takes the self-survey, they receive an email with tips to use it with supervisees. And then the third tool is a role drift checklist. This is completed by the peer recovery support worker and can be reviewed regularly in supervision as sort of a collaborative learning tool. So Tony's dropped all those links in the chat for you. And before I pass the ball to Tony, I'm going to say, please don't exit yet, because we want to make sure that you get a link to the evaluation form, because your feedback informs the way that we structure our training. So Tony, can you share that link and go ahead and wrap us up today?
You got it. So thank you everyone for your time today. We will send all of that information along in our follow-up email. That does conclude our training for today. I did drop a few extra links if you're looking for the link to register for our final session next week. That is also in the chat. And we have a few other trainings coming up, but the eval link is the most important. Please do take a moment and fill that out. You'll also see a link for Peer Careers Illinois, our Rooted and Ready training coming up in September in Illinois. So we thank you so much for your time today, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.